But yeah, so let's see, Nick and Catherine, or one of you, whoever, would one of you like to open us up with a word of prayer?
You want to? Okay.
For this wonderful opportunity tonight to dive into your word. Yeshua, please be with us as we all read a little bit more. We'll learn something from the story here of Daniel. Again, please be with us tonight. Is my prayer. Amen.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Daniel series that we've been doing. Tonight, we're going to be presenting on Daniel 6. Maybe here's a little hint of what we're going to be talking about. Our little buddy Lionel here. My name is Catherine, and then this is Nick. And let me see if I can share our screen so you guys can see the PowerPoint. Can you hear us all right? Just give us a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Okay, let's share here. And voila. Let's go to the beginning. Let's start at the very beginning. So tonight we're talking about Daniel chapter 6. As many of you have been joining us the past couple of weeks, we've just been going through Daniel, the books. And tonight we're talking about Daniel 6.
Yeah, last week we left off with Daniel 5. So Babylon has been conquered by Medo-Persia. And so now this is our first story of Daniel here from these guys. So tonight we're going to be focusing on kind of have a theme, I guess, more God's faithfulness and faithfulness. As you read this chapter, we're going to stop when we come to a certain point. We'll discuss that for a bit, and then we'll move on to the next example that we find of faithfulness. And so I hope you guys just kind of keep a mind out for that theme tonight.
Also, please feel free to jump in. So we'll have points, it'll be a little bit different format. We want it to be a little more discussion kind of. Feel free to, join in. So we'll just read some sections, stop and go through, some points, ask some questions so you can answer. And then Sharina will help us with your answers as well, since we can't really read them. So we'll begin. So like Nick said, this is Daniel now in the kingdom of the Medes and Persians, Medo-Persia. So we'll just start reading from Daniel chapter 6 if you want to join, or you can read on your own from your own Bible, or join us on our slides. So here we go. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any charge against Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God." So we come to our first point, Daniel's faithfulness to God. So going back to the theme of faithfulness, Daniel's life, as we can see, was testimony of the living God. Many people, as we see in Daniel chapter 6 verses 1 through 5, it says that Daniel was faithful, and he was very distinguished above others that were in the same power in his kingdom. So his faithfulness to God also transferred to being faithful to his job. It says that in verse 4, the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful. So what do we think? Is it when that says, that he was faithful? Is it faithfulness to God or faithfulness to the king? It doesn't really say. It's kind of like a general faithfulness. So please feel free to kind of join in. And
that's kind of our first question. Is it possible on a regular basis to be faithful to both? Or do you have anybody had an experience where it's been very successful for you, or maybe not so much? in your daily lives?
I think Daniel was faithful to God, first of all,
Sure.
before anyone else. And after that, of course, he was faithful to the king too. He had to. He was the king, but above everything else, God, his faithfulness was 100% for God.
Mhm.
And I think as people, as Christians, when we don't put God first and we put other things or put other people before God, then we suffer consequences. We can see that in our lives.
Yeah. So do you think it's possible that we, like Daniel, or just in general, could have been faithful to the king before being faithful to God, or would have that been harder to do? If
No,
he didn't have that?
Daniel was faithful to God from chapter 1. It was no doubt there. He's one of those examples in the Bible there where you see that. It's, yes, he was faithful to God above anything else.
Another point we wanted to make here too was obviously the king or some people above Daniel appreciated his hard work, his good character, his faithfulness. That so much so that he was elevated fairly quickly. He's back up to the top again, even in a new regime, new kingdom, whole new world.
Yes.
Does a king or does a superior appreciate your faithfulness to God or your Christ-like character? Because here we see, I guess an authority was, but a lot of his peers did not appreciate it very much at all. In fact, it brought him to jealousy.
Yes,
I just wanted to
depends.
point out. Oh, I just wanted to point out that his loyalty, his faithfulness to the king was all based on God, because of the fact that Daniel knew that God had put him in this position in Babylon. They knew that they were going to have to. They would be that Babylon would conquer them when they did, and so his faithfulness to the king is based on the fact that it is God's. It is God's will that is being fulfilled here. That's my comment.
Yeah, yeah,
Very good.
definitely.
Anybody else?
Sorry, Bahila, were you going to say something earlier?
Yes, you usually bosses, people do not appreciate that if you put them behind God, if you put your faith first. I can tell that from my own experience, but in the end, we have to make a choice. We are going to obey God and worship Him 100%, or we kind of wiggle in between.
Mm-hmm.
I know me personally, I've had very, very good experiences as far as just being straightforward with my needs and at work and with my walk with Christ, I guess. And it's been very well respected and it's been appreciated for the most part so far in my career, in my life. It's been pretty solid.
Amen.
As long as you're
That's
upfront about it is what I've if you're not hiding it or you make that your priority, sometimes a good chunk of people will respect it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Not
And
always.
depends, yes, depends of the people you work with also.
Yes.
Yes.
Cool. Anybody else got anything else to say here before we keep on reading?
I did get one question in the chat, kind of more of a
Okay.
clarifying point of, what was Daniel's job? What did it mean that the king should have no damage?
What was Daniel's job? And can you repeat that?
Yeah, so what was his job, which I believe
Oh,
was just governor over the rest of the governors in Babylon,
Mhm.
and then kind of like a prime minister role. And then the
Right.
second question was, what was the verse saying when it meant, or when it said that the king should have no damage? Like what exactly would that be referring to?
Oh, the king would suffer no loss. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure on that one.
It looks
Oh,
like Pastor, you have
Pastor John.
your hand up if you wanted to say
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. I strongly believe, yes, that he was, the governor or whatever it says here, president over 3 princes of the others. But I believe when it comes to this, that the king should have no damage, that he was somehow in charge with the financial dealings of Medo-Persian kingdom. So he wanted to have somebody who was honest, somebody who can, who is not going to embezzle any money or anything. So don't put anything in his pocket, because it was easy to do that on that type of position. So he wanted somebody who do have integrity and loyalty. So that's what I would get through this, because it's interesting statement that the king should have no damage.
Mhm.
So and for me, that tells me also which was pointed well by all of you, just to have from one kingdom to another, to see those things, you have a man who was immediately picked up. This is going to tell me that this man was a devoted follower of God. There was no hypocrisy in him whatsoever at all. He was just committed to God no matter what is going to happen. There was no profession of faith, no pretense, nothing, just total devotion to. And I believe when we read the book of Daniel, that applies to the days that we are living, which I believe they are last days. That's what God is looking, people who are going to be totally devoted, not just to show to this one or that one. No, he was the same always. He was always the same.
Because of that, he stood out easily amongst everybody around him.
Mhm. Yeah,
He's
definitely.
very visible.
Yeah, and being, you know, completely and totally devoted to God, God was able to put him in these positions, was able to use him in these positions as well to bring about all the things that he was going to bring, whether in prophecy, you know, revealing these prophetic images to Daniel, as we see later on, and also putting him in these positions of power where he can be a powerful witness for God, as we'll see later on as well.
Cool.
All right. Anyone else have anything to say before we move on to the next section? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Here we go. Oops, sorry. Okay. So continuing in Daniel 6 through 10. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. Therefore Darius signed the written decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open towards Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since the early days. Okay. So,
Brings us to our next pause here. So now we have another example of faith. So Daniel's kind of put in a tricky situation here. So what does he do? This one, I guess the point I wanted to make is he was in a lose, well, not really lose-lose, but the his adversaries here thought he was in a lose-lose. If he were to hide and change his behavior, he was already showing he did not have faith or he was afraid of them. That was kind of, and if he did pray in public, he was going to get obviously thrown out to the lion's den. So no matter what he did here, they thought that they had him trapped. Either he was going to be compromising and now he was just like them, he doesn't stand out at all, or they're going to get rid of him. So that's kind of what they're thinking here. Either way, he's gone. I've always kind of wondered here, what do you think Daniel was praying about? Was this just normal? Do you think it concerned him at all? Was this just complete faith, like, I know you can spare me from the lions? Was this, I'm ready to go? What do you all think he was praying that night?
Mihaela?
I think he was praying, God, your will, not mine.
Mhm.
Similar to what Jesus prayed in his last prayer. Because Daniel knew that whatever happens is because God is allowing it. And he knows God's will goes before his.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's what I think. I think when you end up in those situations, you surrender to God,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
God will take charge.
Yeah, it's definitely something I know, like I do, and I think most other humans do, is that the first thing we think about when we come into crisis is, God, please save me. You know, like it's like when something like that happens, you just pray for like a way out. You know, so it's interesting. That's why I was kind of wondering. You know, was Daniel praying for a way out? Like God. But I agree with you what you said, Mihaela, kind of how like Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane when he was praying. You know. He kind of wanted he wanted a way out, but at the same time was saying, you know, if there is no other way, then, you know,
Yes,
your will, your way, for sure.
and I agree with you, because I used to look at things the same way. God, you need to save me. God, help me. But now, the closer I get to God, and I'm just, God allows this for a reason, and I let him take charge and put it in his hands. And I have to admit, it's not easy, you know, because I'm human and I'm struggle with that. But the closer I get to him, I realize I want his will in my life, and I want him to be in control.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. You said the more or the closer you get. Daniel, I would imagine it was maybe not easy, is not right, but it got easier and easier and easier throughout his life. The more experience, the more time he had with God. Those
I
situations, when they come up, it's a little easier to
Yeah.
handle.
I
I
think
think-
so too. And I think as a newborn Christians and as older Christians that have been with Christ for so long, we all thrive for that. We all want that, to let God have complete control and trust him completely.
Sure.
All right, Dan, you were going to say something.
I think he just hit on something. He said the more Daniel had, the more, there goes my dog again. Of course, he's waiting for me to talk. The more Daniel prayed and had more of a prayer life through his life with God, the more comfortable he felt regardless. Remember, the very first threat to their life was the dream that the king had, and he was ready to just one by one off all of his wise men. Daniel and his friends, what did they do? They prayed. It gave them a sense of who was really in control. And it's interesting. It says, once Daniel heard of this decree by the Persian king, he went and prayed. He didn't hesitate and wonder, walk, pace the floors, bite his nails. He did what he was most comfortable doing. He's an old man by now. This is a habit. This is his comfort zone. This is his escape. When his life has been on the line before, he went and prayed. So why wouldn't he go and pray? You know, at this point, it shows a sense of consistency.
Right.
He has to have some kind of empire-wide or nationwide reputation by this time, even before becoming to Persia, because being in Nebuchadnezzar's cabinet, he had probably traveled all over. His character was probably well known. So here was a man who walked it the way he talked it. I would be shocked if this story had played out any other way other than Daniel's immediate response was to pray, because it's the consistency in the kind of person that he was.
Yeah.
Very good.
And I do want to point out a few things in the chat. I know, Luke, you had your hand up, so I'll just say these real quickly. Someone had mentioned that it really seems like Daniel was praying for strength, that he understood God was in control, kind of like in the theme that we're discussing, and also how it really seems to convey that he didn't have many doubts. This doesn't really seem like something you would do if you were dubious about what your own intents. And also just kind of that line of real confidence, not in himself, but in God.
In God.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Luke, were you still wanting to say something?
Yeah, something it mentions explicitly. The Bible says that he went on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God. So obviously his prayer included, probably we can fairly assume that it included a "your will be done" type of prayer, but he also gave thanks before his God because, I mean, he was just so at peace, right? The Apostle Paul says to give thanks and to be thankful for our, not just our weaknesses, but whenever we come into like a time of tribulation, because this was Daniel's opportunity to witness, and
Yeah,
so thankful for his God giving him that opportunity.
definitely. Yeah.
Very cool.
Very good point. Pastor John has his hand up.
Let me unmute myself. Yeah. I'm going back. I don't know. There's so many things, and I don't wanna. You just
There is.
know your timing. I don't want to take the time. You just tell me if it's too much now. Now, when we went through the verse 4 and on, there's quite an interesting text there. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasions against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could not find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Unbelievable. And because for me, this is one of the essence where people today said, well, I am what I am. I'm a sinner. Yes, we are all sinners. He was a sinner, but yet the Bible says that he was without fault. How is this possible? I don't want to switch to that conversation now. And also, next thing that also struck me here is, then said this man, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. What was that law of his God that they found? Again, this is whole another, was there a law of his God? I'm just raising few questions. Maybe at the end we can go ahead.
Yeah.
They were definitely aware of his religious practices too.
I mean, like they
were
knew,
very knowledgeable of it, I'm
because
sure.
like even as we saw before, I think the one with the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they same thing happened. Like, so people might have been aware that the law is not to worship anyone else except for God, like the living God, the God in heaven. And if Daniel was to pray to anyone else, he would be dishonoring the living God. So they must have known that part of the law is you shall have no other gods before the living God.
So are you referring to 10 Commandments?
It could be.
So is
I'm
that
not
the
sure
law
if
that
they
they are
were.
talking? So is this law relevant today?
Oh.
Yes.
Yes, it is. I truly believe it is. And when we say God's laws, are we talking about the 10 Commandments?
I mean, it is the law of his God. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that it is the 10 Commandments, because that is the law of God. I'm
Yes.
not sure though. Maybe somebody else has better insight that they want to
Pastor
share.
John?
No, you're putting me here, Miguel. No, there are other people who are well aware. I definitively, in my opinion, yes, when you refer to the law at that time, the Jews, they don't have distinction between ceremonial, moral law, or everything. So that includes all the laws of the Jews.
Okay.
When the law was mentioned, and here it says, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So Daniel was faithful to the God of heaven, and he, in his faithfulness, was shown by keeping the law of God.
Yes.
and so we can also describe, which I believe there are 10 commandments also, because that is specifically the moral law of God. And the same 10 commandments that he kept them, they're still today relevant, which is a whole another discussion. Are they still on the cross or they are not? And all of those things, in my opinion, I believe they are not. They are relevant today because they are forever. And so they're written with God's finger. We talk about that when God writes with his finger, how he writes those things and what do they mean. And so let me just stop on this. And
Yeah, we could definitely discuss that though later at the end, you know, something we could bring up again. One other point I wanted to bring up before we do move on is that when we see how the governors, they wanted to get this law passed to King Darius, they appealed to his vanity, and we see that happening a lot in the book of Daniel, as we see in as we see it with, you know, Nebuchadnezzar. The statue was about his vanity, about himself, about me. As we see what happened with the previous chapter in Daniel chapter 5, the Medes and Persians were able to get in because Babylon was so like vain that they didn't think that they would be able to get through their gates, so they left it open. You know, that they were this mighty kingdom that was impenetrable. So I think it's important for us ourselves to kind of keep that in mind as well, that we need to be mindful and remember of, you know, who brought us to where we are, who brought us to these positions. I think Chris also has his hand raised.
Yes, hi everyone, Chris from New York, enjoying the study. I also noticed something else, since we're talking about the law of God and the idea of God writing the law with his own finger and the permanence of this law. But there was also like a showdown of the laws, because the Medo-Persians, they had their laws and they're saying our law can't change. So once you sign it, it's permanent. So on one hand, Daniel is following God's law, saying this law is permanent. And on the other hand, they're saying the same thing. They're like, our law can't change. So you see like a conflict.
Right. Definitely.
Very good point.
There's something really interesting is when mankind makes laws, they're not perfect. We go back and we review them. When you sit in a court, you have law against law. Okay, you have lawyer against lawyer. That our laws are not perfect, and the Medo-Persians are thinking that in terms of a law that cannot be changed, is that it's right the first time. Well, no, it wasn't right the first time. The den of lions proved it. Okay, and so it's almost as though once again they're trying to elevate their king in his head, using his pride, elevate him to the level of a god who can write a law that's irreversible. Okay, but he finds out the fallacy of that law, and he finds out when he realizes, oh no, my own men have used me against the man who I admire on my staff, and that is Daniel.
All right, so we're going to move on just because for the sake of time, we have a couple more points to bring up. We can definitely talk more during the open discussion for sure. So here's this quote I have from a Christian author that I was reading, you know, try to get a little bit more insight. The book is called Prophets and Kings, and it's from chapter 44, I believe. Yes, chapter 44. This kind of talks a little bit more about, you know, Daniel's prayer and why he prayed the way he did. The prophet's enemies counted on Daniel's firm adherence to the principles for the success of their plan, and they were not mistaken in their estimate of his character. He quickly read their malignant purpose in framing the decree, but he did not change his course in a single particular, I believe, way was supposed to be there. Why should he cease to pray now when he most needed to pray? Rather, would he relinquish life itself than his hope of help in God? With calmness, he performed his duties as chief of the princes And at the hour of prayer, he went to his chamber, and with his window open towards Jerusalem, in accordance with his usual custom, he offered his petition to the God of heaven. He did not try to conceal his act, although he knew fully well of the consequences of his fidelity to God. His spirit faltered not. Before those who were plotting to his ruin, he would not allow it even to appear that his connection with heaven was severed. In all cases where the king had a right to command, Daniel would obey. But neither king nor his decree could make him swerve from his allegiance to the King of Kings. Thus the prophet boldly yet quietly and humbly declared that no earthly power has a right to interpose between the soul and God. Surrounded by idolaters, he was faithful witness to his truth. His dauntless adherence to right was a bright light in the moral darkness of the heathen court. Daniel stands before the world today as a worthy example of Christian fearlessness and fidelity. Okay, so that was just kind of to wrap it up. That section will continue with Daniel 6:11 through 17.
Verse 11, then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions to any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. So they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and he set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. 16 through 20. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Then a stone was brought and laid to the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lord, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of the lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?
Here's a little picture of Daniel in the lion's den for everybody to get a good sense of what's going on. Okay.
So this kind of brings us to another example of faith here. Does Darius have faith in Daniel's God? We were reading there, Darius, the king here, definitely has built a relationship with Daniel. He's a good friend. He sees he's a good example. He's also very familiar with this God, not serving him directly himself, we don't believe. He's putting a lot of faith in this and God of Daniel. I thought that's something that's often kind of overlooked in this story. We always just talk about Daniel and his situation, but I don't think we highlight Darius's situation enough here. Anything else to add to that? Does anybody kind of have anything to say about this example of faith here?
Darius he comes across to me as a quick study. Daniel had to have established some kind of reputation amongst the other kingdoms when he was with Babylon. Okay. So Darius may have learned something about this particular high-ranking official in Babylon, even as Persia was plotting Babylon's demise. Okay. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I mean, and then why would you take this captive from Israel? He's a captive in Babylon, and now make him chief of your officials? Okay, because you see something in him that was successful. He has a resume that is unsurpassed.
Mhm.
This has to have made the other leaders jealous. I mean, we live in an age where politicians are digging up dirt on each other to bring each other down. So this is nothing new. Okay, it just shows how old it is. Okay, even today we see it going on, and it probably will continue. So he has developed a relationship. At the same time, when you see Daniel establishing this living resume, you also see God working through Daniel. And that's the star on the resume, is God working through him. Okay, so I think when this is probably through Daniel's character, God shines. I think this is how Daniel gets to such a high position in a second kingdom now.
Mhm.
And so now this prisoner, this captive twice removed now is placed over them. These men are jealous.
Mhm.
You know, how dare you put this guy over us? He's not even Persian. He wasn't even Babylonian, at least not by blood in either case.
Yeah. And we can see like, you know, like you were saying, like Daniel had to, this was a hard challenge that he was, you know, facing right now. And that God could shine through him. But I mean, we've been studying that like Daniel has had like test after test after test. And like God has been refining his character through this whole process to the point where he gets to this point in his life where he has to make a harder decision. Now it's like life or death kind of situation. And something that we can like learn for ourselves is maybe to God is preparing us for something, you know, that he will reveal to us later, as in like this happened to Daniel, you know, all these trials prepared him to what God was going to reveal to him, as we'll see in the next chapters after this. I believe Michelle raised her hand first.
Okay.
Michelle?
So, hi.
Hi.
What I'm saying is that when the question is asked, when someone is seeking God, God make himself known. And I think this is the case for Darius, because Darius question was, has your God been able to deliver you? And in the morning, he was eager to go see, what is this God going to do? So it takes faith to believe that God is able to do something. So then when he went in, he received a response to his question. Yes, the God that he served, he's able to deliver. So that was him, that was God responding directly to Darius's question. Do you have faith, Darius, that God can? Yes, God says, I am going to show you a new thing. And God did this not just for Daniel, but for him as well, because the next things we see is an act of faith. Because now what he did, he took a position. And the position he took is that, well, I don't know about any of you, and you did trick me. However, I do believe that this is the real God. This is the living God. And as of this moment that I know, I've had a personal experience with him. Now I'm making a decree that everyone shall serve him. So this is what happened to an unbeliever that comes in and have an experience with God. So again, faith cometh by hearing, and hearing the word of God. So not only that he heard it, he saw it. So that caused him to trust in the God that was able to deliver from the lion's den.
We'll get to that second half of the story here in a minute. Yep.
But yeah, that's a very, very good point. All right. Chris had his hand up next. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I was going to say something similar to that he referred to, Darius referred to Daniel as the servant of the living God. There were many gods that they believed in over there, but it might have been that they were now he's kind of distinguishing this God from all these other gods they've been serving. So like this one's the real one because of what he did for Daniel.
Mhm. Yeah, very true. And then Pastor John, you wanted to say something.
Yeah. There is few. I'm going a little bit back. Few interesting points.
Okay.
First of all, when the King Darius, when he had meetings with all the governors and princes and counselors and everybody else, they gave him a report that all the presidents of the kingdom, the governors, they come together and they form a decree. That was a lie.
Right.
Daniel was not present there. Otherwise, the king, knowing Daniel, he would not sign this decree. As Chris mentioned before, Medo-Persians could also not change whatever it was signed at that time. So also another point that is there, Daniel have an active prayer life. So it says there that he prayed 3 times a day. He kneeled down, he prayed, he gave thanks to God. Okay, see, so his prayer life was continual, consistent, and it was filled with thanksgiving. This is what I see here. So when he was praying. Now, it is also interesting. I need to put this. I'm not going to discuss tonight, but for the future study that we need to notice something. We had in Daniel 3, we have the image. We have image worship. Here in Daniel 6, we have a worship of a man. Very interesting points, which they are going to lead us in a future discussions. So in Daniel 3, you have image worship, and here you have a worship of man. So we need to connect later on. I'm not going to discuss tonight, but just I'm giving this to everybody to think about when we come to understand what is happening here, because the book is really, really connected.
It builds on itself, definitely. Yeah, in many ways. Okay, we'll continue on. Daniel 6:21 through 25. Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel to and shut the lion's mouth, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you." Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of the lions, then their children and their wives. And the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the den. So King Darius wrote, "To all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of the kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure till the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. Who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions?" So Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So that's the end of Daniel 6, and then here we come to our conclusion before we go into the more general discussion. This whole story is just a powerful testimony in many different ways. Daniel was once again saved by the hand of God, and then Daniel leans on God to deliver him. As we talked about before, Darius now has an encounter with the living God. Before, he kind of just saw it from a distance, but now he actually experienced it. It was his experience, his living experience. Now he has a testimony that he can share, that the God delivered his friend. And now this is kind of general questions, for everyone. Have you had an encounter with the living God? And then if you have, how did you finally get to know God? Next question is, do you live like Daniel? Are you continuously reflecting your relationship with God? And to add, are you continuously having that prayer life with God, and that connection, that vertical connection that he had? And lastly, are you a living testimony? Or how can we live a life to be prepared to face the lions that, that might come our way? Kind of just more reflection questions, And then that, concludes, kind of wraps up what we have. There is a lot more to discuss in here.
If you wanted to go back and talk about any of that, now is kind of the time to do so.
Interesting question I've been asking myself here. Do I see a similarity in the last few, towards the end of Daniel chapter 6 and the end of Daniel chapter 4? Two kings who are giving praise to Daniel's God, and they're sending that praise out to their entire kingdom. And I wonder if Darius read Daniel chapter 4, which is basically Nebuchadnezzar's letter and testimony. Maybe that he read that, maybe that he knew ahead of time, or that planted a seed. And now we see that seed sprouting because, his firsthand experience is the fertilizer on the basically now on a seed that may have been planted when Nebuchadnezzar sent that letter out to the then known world. If you read the beginning of chapter 4, it tells you who it's going to. It's going to everywhere that Nebuchadnezzar has presence, the entire world. What's the possibility that Darius might have read that letter, that it might have just planted a seed or sparked his curiosity? And now he comes face to face with the cause of those writings and realizes that, hey, every word in that is true. And even before Daniel was face to face with the lions, he showed an element of faith, saying, pray that your God, et cetera, will do this for you. So there's something already in there before he even draws him out of the den. There's an element of faith that's already been planted in this king.
I guess another point too, I just kind of wanted to bring up. Darius has this experience, this wonderful, wonderful experience, and he doesn't just go, wow, that was cool, and then walk away. He's sharing it. He's excited.
Right.
He's super passionate about this. This is an incredible experience. He wants to tell everybody about it.
Yeah, I want to mention also there was the way that Dan put it. That's exactly, well, not exactly what I was going to mention, but I wanted to point out that the conclusion of the last chapter, chapter 5, that even so, after Daniel denying the king of the gifts that offered if he interpreted the writing on the wall, he was still given the gold chain, the purple robe, and he was third in command of Babylon at that time. And I'm sure that when Darius took over, I'm sure that when he was being briefed about the previous kingdom, that the prominence of Daniel came up. And I am just going to go out on a limb and say that the story of the writing on the wall was also told to the king. Yeah. So yes, along with what Dan said, yes, Darius definitely was witness, if not only by ear, but at least he had heard of the providence of this God that Daniel worshipped and prayed to every day. So yes, it is rightfully to say that Darius was aware of what God had done in Babylon at that point as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I did want to bring up one comment that someone made in the chat. It's not necessarily right on the point of your thoughts here, but it was kind of made earlier. And they said the Medes and the Persians had captured Babylon, and normally they would execute all of the Babylonian leaders, all the previous governors and whatnot. So God had surely been with Daniel, and it may be the reason why the other satraps were, I think, kind of subservient to Daniel. The original comment, and the person who shared it, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. The original comment said that the satraps were Helios of Daniel. I'm not sure if the Helios was a typo or if it's referencing something that I just am not well versed enough to know what it's referencing. But thank you for the comment on this.
The word was supposed to be jealous, and
oh, that makes sense. Okay, jealous. I was trying to recreate the what alternative words it could have been, but yeah, jealous. Thank you. So yeah, that might be a reason why they were jealous of Daniel and his leadership.
Yeah, there was a lot to be jealous of.
The spell checker strikes again.
Yeah, I
You
want
know,
to ask something when you're done. I don't have the little hand thing.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Go ahead, Gina.
Okay, for you can, I think Ford was going to say something.
Dan, were you going to say something?
it's something that just popped in my head. It could also be that Darius, like Nebuchadnezzar, was wise enough to surround himself with the wisdom that was outside, that came from outside of Persia. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar brought people in, gave them a new name, brainwashed them, or at least that was his attempt to make them Babylonian. So if I'm putting myself in Darius's place, seeing how great Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom was, the center of wisdom and knowledge, etc., why wouldn't, when I take over Babylon, choose the cream of the crop there, which was Daniel? You know, why wouldn't I follow in suit? I mean, hey, it worked for the guy I'm taking over. Yeah, he had a grandson or a son or whoever, Belshazzar, who wasn't as sharp, but he has, you know, it's interesting. If you go to West Point or Annapolis, Maryland, what do these military academies study? They study military greatness. I'm sure that Darius studied greatness of kings that came before him, their wisdom, their smartest decisions. And so maybe he just took notes of Nebuchadnezzar's accomplishments and added that to his own success.
It's kind of a capture of territory and people and money, and but it's also a capture of a lot of intelligence and knowledge to expand your kingdom as well, for sure. Yeah.
All right, Gina, you were going to say something.
I was gonna something that I hadn't really noticed for years, and maybe a few months ago this was brought up in a different study I had done, but how King Darius makes that decree, and you're seeing the political religious union attempting there. He's passing a law and it's forced. So he's saying, I'm making this decree, and we know that God doesn't coerce his kingdom. It's always got to be chosen. We choose it, we volunteer it, we submit to it, we surrender. We don't come to that point when it's being pushed on us, when it's a law. And so I think we could be making an assumption that King Darius is having this conversion moment or something like that, where he is recognizing the power of the God of Daniel, but we don't know his heart. It doesn't really talk to us about it. With the previous king, we know he wrote one of the chapters, and there's more about his experience. But the fact that he just passes a law, he has to, you could look at it another way. Everybody's going to hear about this thing that happened, this man who was saved. And so if these kings, now they look at themselves as gods, little g gods. And so in order to not look like a failure, he has to align himself with what looks more powerful. So in a way, we don't know if he's doing it. Is he doing it to save face? He can't go around in the kingdom and have everybody knowing that there's something more that supersedes him as the head of that kingdom. So I just throwing that out there as a thought, because we make that assumption, but the fact that the thing that stood out to me that I had never really noticed is see how the government piece, the monarch piece, is trying to merge with the spiritual part, the religious piece. And isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Definitely.
sure.
That's something I noticed when I read as well. I was like, oh, is this a little bit of religious freedom? What is religious freedom? Is it freedom when we're forced to worship God? You know, I was kind of thinking the same thing.
Somebody earlier made a point about God's law is not flawless, but man's law is with the whole line. Who was it earlier that made that point was flawless? Right in the end here, we see another example of a law of man that's just
Changed.
not quite right. And it's kind of, not quite right.
Two things I'm looking at here now that we're on this topic. For him to place Daniel as the head says something about his character. Okay, and we know God is at work there. Now, maybe he's just attracted to Daniel's character. He knows Daniel is a living God, a man who fears the living God. But in verse 16, the lions have not had their opportunity to do their damage yet. And he says, may your God whom you serve continually rescue you. Okay, so there's an element of faith there that is not so much about alignment. There's some portion of belief that is there before it has a true opportunity to prove itself. Okay, so there may be some alignment. Is okay, maybe I need to make myself look good, but first of all, he was upset. Okay, it wasn't like Nebuchadnezzar was proven wrong and Nebuchadnezzar had to backpedal and make himself look good. This man was upset because he had been duped. His men had taken advantage of his pride. They're the ones who had made him look bad. So he is already demonstrated by putting Daniel in that high position and then urging Daniel to pray to his God. Why would he say, Daniel, pray to your God, instead of Daniel, I'm so sorry this happened. I didn't mean for this to happen. He must have known something about Daniel's God.
Like he acknowledges that his God and his power, but he's not saying, I'm gonna pray for you.
No, he's not fully convinced.
Yeah.
He's not fully convinced, but there is a seed that is planted there.
Right. Yeah.
I would like to add something. If we read what it says in Daniel, he said, your God whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. That's what he said to Daniel. So he had faith because he said he will deliver you. And after that, he went to his chamber and he spent the night fasting. Right? So he had faith. He didn't say to Daniel, your God might deliver you. He said he will. When you say that to someone, when you use that tense of the verb, that it's an assurance. He will deliver you. So I think Darius had faith. Otherwise, he would have not said that to him. You don't say that to anyone if you don't believe that God is gonna work through that person and is gonna help them. And he knew Daniel was a faithful man. That's what I understand.
Yeah, it is interesting. It doesn't say anywhere in here that Darius prayed to his gods or to Persian gods or whoever's gods all night.
Yeah, that's true.
He fasted.
Yeah.
That was a time where they believed that their gods that were handmade of metal or whatever, they believed those gods were distant for the most part. So there really wasn't much. There was not common practice to go to those gods seeking mercy.
But he knew Daniel's God is merciful.
Michelle raised her hand.
Hand raised over here.
Yeah, I like the fact that we're going back again to see what was his action. The fact that he spent the night fasting no music, just him. And whom was he praying to? He certainly wasn't praying to himself, because he was praying to the God of Daniel, because it says, your God whom you serve continually will deliver you. So therefore he went in. My understanding was that if he feels that way, then he's going to be asking the God of Daniel to deliver, no? So not only that, he spent the night fasting, and then early in the morning, he went to ask and to see for himself, was God really able to deliver? Because he knew he was asking. And then now this. So when you look at the prayer, can you go back? This is what he said afterwards. If you go back to the other verses, this is a prayer. This is a praise for this is, you have made a petition before God, you interceded, and then now you know truly, he said, for he is the living God, not any man, not any idols, not anything, the God of heaven and earth. So if you look, this is a praise. He's the living God. He is the God that is steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. These are normally the prayers that are delivered by the people of Israel. And then he talks about the God that delivers, the God that rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So that was the testimony, the things he lived himself, the experience, but he already knew this God. He already knew this God as the God that intercedes, that delivers and rescue. I will say this, to me, looks like a praise.
But I kind of wanted to readdress Gina's point, though, because we've been thinking about it, you know, this while we've been talking. Is it bad? Is it wrong to make a decree that every man in the kingdom must like believe the living God? Is that a bad thing that happened?
I think it's a reflection of his, let's just say, not full understanding of the character of God, because God would never coerce you. And he was accused by Lucifer of being coercive and not giving you the freedom. That's what he's accused of. That's what people are baited with. This God who uses his power to, even if it's good, if I have the power, should I force people to be good? Does that make me benevolent if I'm forcing you to be good? That's just not it's not his character, it's not his way. You have to have that conversion yourself, and you have the choice at any point in time. You know, like the angels in heaven who didn't rebel could still to this day decide, I changed my mind. They could do that. They have that freedom. But that doesn't work on the flip side. You can't go over to like Satan's team. And you know what I mean? That's how Satan wants to govern, with coercion, with these laws that they're not, let's call them, they're not natural laws. A natural law is like, you need sunshine and water and oxygen. You know, those are natural laws, but these are coercive laws where, you know, I'm like arbitrarily setting a fine for something, you know. I'm not explaining this well.
No, it was a really interesting point that you made earlier. It's been making my
I'm going off track, but the point is, you know, it's not good to force you to be good, because then you're not actually choosing to be good. So it is, in my view, it's bad to force you to be good. It would be actually better and loving for me to teach you and show you, and hopefully you choose of your own accord then to be good, because you want to.
Yeah, he has an experience here, but does he totally get it yet? I don't know.
I think it
Not yet. Not yet.
you can parallel it strongly with Nebuchadnezzar in chapters 2 and 3.
Yes.
You know, he has his early experiences with Daniel, and similarly, he makes these same decrees of, you know, no one can talk bad against the God of Daniel, or so and so forth. And it's that same logic of, you know, he doesn't understand yet. And you can see that because, you know, Nebuchadnezzar doesn't have his real conversion experience till after those decrees are made. He's still trying to force things, but we don't see that same decree after his experience of 7 years eating grass. So yeah, no, it's Darius is in that same place Nebuchadnezzar was in chapters 2 and 3.
Yes, I agree. I had the same thought when Gina was talking, and God gives us free will. And I know that from my own experience. It doesn't force you to do
You know,
anything.
I see it when I see
Yes.
this as something as it allows your mind to fill in the gaps. You see what happened with Nebuchadnezzar, and we saw from point A to Z and his conversion. Okay, and it kind of reminds me of when I was a little kid. I watched a cartoon. The bad guy goes and chases the good guy, and then he paints what looks like a door, and he opens the door and he falls down the elevator shaft. And then second time he goes, that he opens the door, they don't show what happens. You know what happens. Okay, you're allowed to fill it in. We see everything going from point A to point Z with Nebuchadnezzar. With Darius, we see everything start from point A, almost in a similar way, but a different situation. We're not allowed, we are not given the details of the finish, but we see it set in motion. We see it set in motion. Okay. And yeah, both cases you have monarchs who they're used to making decrees, and that's how they initially give their honor to God. They make the decrees. But over a period of time, Nebuchadnezzar comes to the point where it's not about making decrees, it's about having a humble relationship. Okay. And so we see Darius get to the decree mode, but maybe that's all we need to see. Okay. Maybe that's all we need to see. And that let the story finish its own self in our minds and our hearts. We see how things are set in motion here. So maybe it did not progress to this in the same way that Nebuchadnezzar's did, but we see it starting out and moving in that direction, and then the story ends.
And maybe this can be an example for our lives as well, is that we can be someone like Daniel to kind of live our life in such a way with such example that other people can start to have that experience and encounter with God. And I mean, we don't really see the end of, we don't always see the end of when we give our, you know, testimony and witness to other people. We just plant that kind of like a seed, and we may see it progress, but we may never see the end of it. And I think that's kind of what you're saying here too, is that we don't really see the end with what happens to Darius. We can see that he's on the right track to continue.
Going somewhere.
Yeah, it's going somewhere, but we don't really know. Yeah.
This may one thing. This made me think about something, but maybe I don't know if I should say it. Maybe think what the decree Darius gave. It's like that sometimes happens even in Christian families, right? You have children, and your children are born the Christian family, and you expect them. It's kind of, you force them to worship God because they have to, because you do it as a parent, and you want them to do it also. And maybe the children don't have that ability yet to understand that God gives you free will and you can choose to worship, but the parents want their children to follow God and to follow in their footsteps. And sometimes it is like a decree. I'm sure a lot of Christian children go through that, even the young ones, and they just follow all these rules, right, without really understanding who God is, and that God gives us free will, and he gives us free choice. Even after we decide to follow him and we give our lives to him, he still gives us free will. He still gives us the option to make our own choices. So it just
Sure.
crossed my mind.
Yeah, good point.
Sorry, Michelle, you had your hand up. Thanks. Sorry, Michelle. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I keep thinking about the relationship that existed between the priesthood and the king in Israel, right? And I think we are kind of bypassing that in many ways, because the relationship was that when they realize something, the king will say, okay, let's all do this now, because sometimes the priests will not be effective in making sure that everyone were following after God. If the king was not following after God, then they will do things that will lead the entire people astray. So if you look at it from that perspective, perhaps you can see that making a decree for him was just trying to leading or gearing people into the right path. I mean, we do understand now we have the dissection, or we have the separation of church and state, but church and state during those days, what did it look like, and what needed to happen for the people to follow after a God? Because most of the time, this is just the story of Israel. The king in charge did wrong, and everybody else did wrong as well. And when the king said, okay, I've done wrong, let's repent and turn back to God, it wasn't by a decree, but it was definitely formally stated by them. So perhaps this is the same thing.
Mhm.
Pastor John, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I'm going back to the same thought. I mentioned at the beginning, verse 4. What I'm impressed here is with the character of Daniel. Going through one kingdom to another kingdom, he's standing totally. And as I said, verse 4, they couldn't find no fault in him. Also, when you read in verse 22, I'm just going to read here, and it says, my God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him, and also, king, I have done no wrong before you. So he was found innocent in front of God. He was found somehow blameless in front of God, without fault in front of God. And why? Also, another thing, at this time, there is lots of people who are going through anxiety, going through difficulties because they've been isolated, and all of those things. It's affecting lots of people. And this man, he knew that they were lying at anything, opened the doors 3 times a day, no anxiety, no matter what is going on. Absolute, total, full trust in God. That's what I see. Not in man. Not men are doing. Absolute, full, total trust in God. And he goes on, and I believe that at the end of the time that we are living, which we are going to study, that this stone that is coming down represents the Christ coming and everything. The time that we are living in this divided kingdom is the time that God is looking for people who are going to be characterized with the faithfulness to him, by the indwelling Christ in him, who will keep the law of God and the commandments of God. And it says, so this is what I see, and I'm really, really impressed by Daniel, what he's. Also, there is another thing that, again, we are trying to avoid the book of Revelation, but you cannot avoid it also. At the end of time, you're going to have the beast, mark of the beast, and the principles are clear. It's going to be the issue of your loyalty, to whom you worship, to whom you're loyal. So as I see Daniel also, there are few things that you can see here. Daniel was persecuted because he chose to obey God's law. That's why. Then Just think also which we are coming next week to chapter 7, which is going to be introduction and everything. Then we have the king of Medo-Persia made a law without a law which commanded a false worship. Okay, the Medo-Persian law led people to worship a man. Quite interesting. The penalty in Daniel 6 involved the death decree. Daniel was saved by the intervention of God. And then at the end, those who were persecuting, what do? They end up in the lion's den. It's quite interesting. The parallel, you cannot avoid it whatsoever. When you connect with the beast, the mark of the beast, and all of those things. That.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and it like you were saying, the parallel, and I think the solution for us is to be like Daniel and have that complete, total devotion to God in order to be prepared, for these challenges that will one day come to pass. And to keep his example, and pray and give, thanksgiving to God in all circumstances, no matter, what is happening in the world.
Great example for the future. Yeah.
And even
What's
now,
interesting
Even now.
even
Yeah.
now.
What's
Well,
interesting
keeping in mind that the only thing we're going to take to heaven with us is our character. So this is the thing that God is trying to perfect in us while we're on earth, teaching us how to love one another, teaching us how to forgive one another, to forbear with one another. So this is a lesson in all of that, knowing that our character matters. The choices we make for God matters. And not only it matters, it will change an entire nation. One person can affect an entire nation if your character is found to be innocent before God and you allow God to use you for the advancement of his kingdom.
And I
It's
just want to
interesting how there is a judgment and a verdict here. Okay, and I'm looking at the judgment. It says, these men said, will never find any basis for charges against Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. And then the verdict, Daniel gave that verdict to Darius, is that God has found me innocent. And that is with his relationship with God. But he also mentions his relationship with Darius. He's been found innocent there too. I've not done anything wrong against you, king. In so many words, he says that. Basically, that's the first and second great commandment. That is the law in a nutshell. What are the affairs between us and our creator? What is it that are the affairs between us and our fellow man? And Daniel is stating that I've been found innocent in both cases. It's interesting, and as Pastor was speaking, it brought me back to how the law is brought up in its fullness in this chapter.
I think that's all the time we have for tonight, right?
Yeah, like what,
Is that
two minutes?
Like,
Unless
that's everybody. We're moving into Daniel 7 next week, or is it next week or the week after for the seminar?
next week, I think.
Next week?
Yeah.
And then, okay.
Yeah.
And then there's a break,
Okay.
and then yeah. So next week,
Next
Daniel
week, 4 weeks.
7, and that'll be done by, I think, Brother Ruben Alarcon, right?
No, it's gonna be
my
Luke.
wife.
Yeah,
Luke.
Ruben
That's
Alarcon
good.
has 8.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I didn't have a schedule. Okay, so Luke's gonna take it from here.
And remember that 7 begins the more intense prophecy section. So there's still a chance to jump in if you want to invite your friends. You're not behind at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and definitely encourage everyone. I mean, we should be reading it before Friday, but
Yeah. That helps a lot.
From now on, for real, we should really read on our own the week
Definitely,
before.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's have a closing prayer, and
Sure.
then I guess whoever likes to socialize. Do we do social afterwards?
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
we'll go ahead and close with prayer. Or Pastor John, did you have any
Pastor
last
John.
thoughts that you wanted to share?
No, probably you would just say, I'm just, maybe there are some people who didn't want to share at that time, but once we close with the prayer, we can continue discussing the topic. We don't need to stop.
Sure.
Okay? Those who needs to leave, they can leave.
Wait.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I'll close with prayer then. Yeah. Okay. Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this beautiful day that we have, that we're in the Sabbath day now, Lord. Thank you so much that we had this time to go over your word with our fellow friends here, and that we were able to discuss and get a little more insight into your word. Please be with us now as we think about what we have learned. Help us to continue to think and dwell on it, especially the character that Daniel has, and that we may be like him, Lord, so you can prepare us for the things that are ahead and continue to refine our characters, Lord. Please be with us as we continue with the Sabbath. Help us to have good devoted time with you, and spend the most time we have, with you in your presence. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
And
everyone.
for those of you who are going to head on out, we will see you next week.